Stop looking for anxiety. We hear this advice all the time. Stop checking to see if you're anxious, you're only making it worse. It's no secret that when we're suffering with high levels of anxiety to the point where anxiety itself has become our primary concern, it's the repeated self-scanning and internal checks that we constantly engage in that goes a long way to perpetuating and even amplifying our anxiety. Now, it's all very well to say stop doing it, but as with many things in life, that's easier said than done. I'm Tim Box, and in this video, I'm going to be explaining why we find it so hard to just stop checking for signs of anxiety. But I'll also be showing you how we can do it when we shift our outlook and think about things in a slightly different way. So let's do it. Welcome back to my channel, or if this is your first time, I'm Tim Box. I'm a mind coach, and for the last 12 years or so, I've been working with people to help them overcome all sorts of emotional and psychological issues, and in particular, helping them get control of anxiety. Before we get started, do me a favor, hit that like button, and if at some point in the next few minutes you hear me say something that you think might be of value for other people to hear, then please take a moment to share this video with those you care about. Anxiety has a habit of making us feel isolated and alone, like the way we feel is completely different to those around us. And whilst we are all unique human beings with our own individual way of experiencing our particular set of emotional responses, there are a few things about high anxiety that remain common to nearly all those that suffer. The most noticeable one is the habit we will at some point fall into of regularly checking to see how anxious we currently feel. We become well practiced at self-scanning. Whatever we might regard to be our own particular tell or symptom of anxiety, and this might differ wildly from person to person, we find ourselves regularly running a kind of internal check to see whether or not we're displaying any of those telltale anxiety signs. The most common time to do this is first thing in the morning when we wake. Often the very first thing we do is check to see whether our anxiety is bad. And should we find anything to worry about, then we know exactly what that means. Today is going to be difficult because we're having an anxious one. Now, the reason we all know not to do this is because checking to see if our anxiety is bad is an activity that inevitably creates anxiety. In the same way that searching our house to check for any intruders is likely to come with some degree of concern, running a self-audit to see if anxiety is going to strike today is an anxious thing to do. The irony here is that we're only checking because we want to make sure it's not there, but it's the checking that puts it there. Now, you've probably been told this 1,000 times, but isn't it strange how knowing this doesn't seem to make it any easier to just stop? It's very much like once we're caught in the loop, it's almost impossible to get out of it. But there's a really good reason why this catch-22 situation perpetuates itself, and it's probably not what you think. But first, the bad news. Many people will tell us that trying to not do something doesn't work because our subconscious doesn't process a negative. It's that classic "don't think of a pink elephant" example. However, it's not really about that. In truth, it's more about the fact that by trying to not check for anxiety, we're simply putting our focus on the thing we're trying to ignore. And as far as our mind is concerned, the simple rule here is that whatever we focus on grows. But there's a more important reason we can't just stop checking for anxiety. We're checking for it because we perceive anxiety to be a threat. It's hard to simply stop paying attention to something that part of our mind regards as a danger. Something that challenges our safety inevitably demands our attention. We don't simply ignore threat. And we know we've started to view anxiety as dangerous to us because we very probably stopped being able to experience mild anxiety a long time ago. As soon as we experience any slightly anxious feeling, it amplifies to a visceral level because our mind is reacting to it as if we just found that intruder in the house. The reason our self-scanning results in high anxiety is because we're hoping to confirm there is zero anxiety present. And of course, we're never going to find zero anxiety when we're performing an action that makes us anxious. But yes, there is some good news here, and ultimately the story does potentially have a happy ending. No matter how long we've been caught in the high anxiety loop, or how much we might think we're broken, returning any anxiety to what we might regard as normal levels doesn't involve regular internal checks of our body and mind, or the learning of multiple anxiety calming techniques. In fact, it largely involves doing nothing. You see, checking for anxiety was never a conscious decision you made. You never chose to add this activity to your daily routine. It was just what began happening when you started to regard anxiety as a problem. A part of your subconscious flagged up a threat and your mind began monitoring for it. So there is in fact only one thing you need to change to stop perpetuating the high anxiety response, and that is to stop regarding anxiety as a threat. As soon as we recognize that feeling anxious is not dangerous or any indicator that there's something wrong with us, our subconscious stops regarding it as something of importance. And when our mind stops regarding something as important, it stops looking for it, and it even stops paying attention to it when it actually is there. This can be achieved by letting go of what we're actually looking for when we're performing those checks. What we're really looking for is that moment when we search for anxiety but can't find it. We're looking for that instant when the burden of this anxiety problem is lifted from our shoulders and we can once again breathe easy. In the vast majority of cases, recovery doesn't really present itself in that way. Now, don't get me wrong, change can happen in a moment. In fact, change does happen in that moment where we fully accept anxiety as no threat. But that moment often goes by at first, largely unnoticed. Before we started experiencing high anxiety, we never really noticed that we weren't that anxious. We didn't notice it because it wasn't in any way noteworthy. Nothing about day-to-day anxiety levels feels threatening, so instead of paying attention to our anxiety levels, we were probably paying attention to the issue we were anxious about, like money, relationships, health, or any number of other concerns the average human being might have. We only started to pay attention to our anxiety levels when we perceived the anxiety itself to be a problem. This is why realizing that our anxiety levels have returned to a normal, functional level is often something we notice retrospectively. We were noticing it because there was a problem. When there's no problem, we simply won't notice it. And the reason we won't have to directly do anything to reduce that anxiety is because being in a constant state of high anxiety or fight or flight is not our default state. Our mind has to work pretty hard to keep us in that anxious state, and it's doing so, as uncomfortable as it feels and as unhelpful as it may be, because it perceives threat. All the while anxiety is perceived to be the threat, our mind will maintain the heightened focus on it. But our natural state is one of calm. Our natural state is to be at peace and at rest, and we will return to this natural state when we no longer feel under threat. So what action can we take now? What can we actually do to make a difference today? Well, we can start that process of teaching our mind there is nothing to fear from feeling anxious. Anxiety is an emotion we will feel every day for as long as we're alive and we care about what happens to us. So the next time you notice yourself feeling anxious, pay less attention to the fact you feel anxious, because that's healthy, and shift your focus instead on the thing you feel anxious about. Get curious about what your mind is trying to tell you. Is it drawing your attention towards something important you need to take care of? Is it expressing a concern about something in your immediate future? And is it a situation you can do something about, or something you can do nothing about? Basically, instead of becoming concerned about the fact you're anxious, start getting curious about the purpose of the anxious feeling. Seek to understand what your mind is regarding as important right now. And if the only reason you can find for being anxious is that you're worried about how anxious you might feel today, then remind yourself that feeling anxious is okay. Even though anxiety can feel uncomfortable, if you simply focus on the task at hand at any given moment, then it won't stop you getting things done and getting the most from the day ahead. It might not feel easy to stop your mind checking for anxiety because you weren't consciously choosing to do it in the first place. But if, when you do, you remind yourself that those anxious feelings are natural and nothing to fear, your mind will quickly lose interest in them. You'll then do a lot less checking and feel a lot less anxious. But tell me, what are your thoughts about this? Are you familiar with that feeling of checking for anxiety? Do you have your own ways of dealing with that? Let me know in the comments below. And if you have any questions, put them down there too, and I'll do my best to answer them. I hope this video has been of value. Please hit that thumbs up button if you like what I do, and why not subscribe to the channel for weekly mind management tips and anxiety advice. Remember, I'm also now doing a weekly live Q&A every Friday at 6 p.m. London time, where you can ask me your anxiety related questions. So please join me for that. But that's it for now. I'm Tim Box, Mind Coach. Always remember to be kind to your mind, and I'll see you next time.